So, so Mike is going to talk about searching for humanity and what that means to him, correct? Mike Siegel.
Thank you all so much for having me. It means a lot to be in this sanctuary with you because this place represents a lot to a lot of people. The St. Andrews community, basically showing up for everyone within Travis County, the greater Austin area, regardless of where you were born, whether your mother happened to be on this side of the border or the other side of the border. And so this is, to me, a place of justice, a place of hope and love, and I'm really honored that y'all had me here. I've gotten to know Pastor Rigby here and there in the work that I've been involved with to fight for justice for our immigrant families, and so I really want to thank him for having me here as well, and really all of you who are part of this community, making it stronger. This place, to me, is a place that represents the best of our human nature, that it's going to be open and nurturing and loving, and that we're going to show our love for humanity through our deeds, not our words, right? That our actions are going to reflect our beliefs on this planet. And this is a community that has stepped up even when that means taking risks, right? I mean, because it's not easy to provide a sanctuary for Hilda and Ivan, right? There's some threats that come along with that, but it's the right thing to do. And so I'm honored that all of y'all have been willing to do that on behalf of our common humanity. Big picture in this world, in this country, the only people who ever make history are small groups of people. Whether you talk about the abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, the LGBTQIA movement after Stonewall. It's like that comment from Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world because it's the only thing that ever has, right? And I feel like this community represents that. And your pastor has been a part of that, of this legacy and this work to uphold our common humanity, and this speaker series is a part of that, so thank you for including me. I'll say a little bit about myself, just to give you a sense of who I am and where I'm coming from. I do feel like I'm among kindred spirits, but I'm from a mixed religious background myself. I have a Christian mother, a Jewish father, a Muslim wife, atheist family members, but the common thread has always been service and really social justice. A friend of mine and a friend of my wife, who we met when we first started out as public school teachers in 1999, he was a poet. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He died far too young. But he was constantly coming up with inspirational sayings, and one he came up with is, "Love is an action." And he took it from, a speech of Martin Luther King, but the idea that, we show love through our deeds, right? And that's how we impact the world. And to me, I'm lucky to have learned those values from my family. My mother is from a Protestant family in California. She was pretty well off growing up. To give you a sense of it, she was on the diving team in the Ballet Aquacade Club at her high school. Not every high school has such things. But she also grew up with a strong commitment to social justice. And so, she was part of the free speech movement to oppose the House on Un-American activities, that part of the Red Scare. She was a part of the anti-war movement. And later on, she was a part of the union movement. She was one of these people that went to work at a factory, in part to make a living, but in part to organize the workers. And so when I was in her womb, she was at a Caterpillar factory as a machinist. And she was a shop steward in the union. And the joke is that she was on the picket line when I was in her belly, advocating for better working conditions. But there's actually some truth to that. She's actually here, although she's taking care of my kids right now in the outer room. But big picture, one of the things that she taught me was the most important thing we can do is person-to-person communication. Some people like to do political work so they can be the leader or the president or the secretary of some organization. But she was always about going to organize the rank and file, going to meet the people. She calls it social investigation, right? If you have these conversations, you can learn what people care about and maybe how to best serve them. My father is from a working-class Jewish community in New York State, and he kind of grew up fighting as he tells the stories. I guess at that time in New York, with the local Italian boys, you had to kind of fight to maintain your place in the world. but he kind of brings that same scrappy spirit to his work. You know, he was one of these people that went down to the South during the Freedom Summer to try to integrate lunch counters and things like that. And that experience inspired him to become a lawyer because he relied on lawyers to get him out of jail when he and his cohorts were arrested for being down in the South. And for 45 years, he's been a union lawyer, a civil rights lawyer, and also been part of this work for social justice. My wife has a similar inspirational story. You know, she's born in the northwest of Nigeria in a province called Sokoto. And I've been there. It's one of the hottest places on earth. Not quite conducive to my temperament. But, you know, she grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And, you know, as a young person, didn't always have a clear immigration status. But she knew that she wanted to be a part of this community, this culture. And she might have started out shy and not known exactly what her voice would be. But she excelled in school. She ended up studying animal science at Cornell University. She joined the Teach for America program to become a public school teacher, and she actually met me in that program, and later became a veterinarian and bought a practice here in Austin. And probably wasn't part of her plan, but she's also the biggest supporter of a congressional candidate for Congress. And so here we are, you know, raising our mixed race, mixed religion, mixed status children in Austin, Texas, taking on projects like buying a business, and I went to work at City Hall as city attorney, running for Congress. And with all these challenges, we've never felt more loved and more welcomed in a community than here in Austin. And that, to me, says a lot, you know, how there is this really loving, progressive community here, and it's made us feel welcome and has kind of given me courage to take on some big projects. So thank you all for being a part of that welcoming community. I want to just talk about a couple things on the theme here about this moment in American history that we're at, when there's a real struggle between different forces about what it means to be an American and who should have a voice in determining our future in the United States. And the two issues that I relate to most closely that have to do with this idea of who is an American and who should have a voice are immigration and voting rights. And for the Austin community, for folks here at this church and in the greater Austin area, the immigration issue has been at the top of our minds and at the front of our hearts, you know, especially when we have a president who says things like "Make America Great Again," but we think he really means "Make America White Again," right? And, you know, for me, the question of immigration, I've always more believed in that poem that's on the Statue of Liberty, you know, written by Emma Lazarus. You know, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And the idea that the American dream should be everyone, be for everyone, no matter where you're from, and that this should be a place of opportunity for all. And that the folks who are coming across our border, whether it's the northern border, the southern border, the west or the east, that we all deserve dignity, and that we all deserve common decency. And also the idea that, you know, especially if we're talking about the folks from the south, whether from Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala, these are folks whose indigenous ancestors have been migrating north and south for far longer than European folks have been here, right? And a lot of these folks can truly say they didn't cross the border, right? The border crossed them. And so for me, you know, like a lot of you, I felt shock and sadness and misery when our new president took power in early 2017, and he basically started directing all these hateful messages to our neighbors from the south. And it was interesting for me at that point of history. It turned out I was in the right place at the right time at City Hall here in Austin as a city attorney. And before that, my background, I've been a public school teacher, taught for 7 years in the public schools, 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 8th grade. I ran after school programs, summer programs for low-income youth of all types. Met my wife in the public schools. I taught bilingual classes. Later decided to serve the people in a different way as a civil rights lawyer. My parents tried to convince me not to. They said being a teacher is the most important thing you can do in this world, although they're both lawyers. So do as I do. But it really was concern for the immigrant community that actually first got me on that track to being a lawyer. I was actually teaching for a year in Brooklyn, New York in 2001, 2002. I followed my wife out there, my future wife. And I was teaching at a school in Brooklyn, teaching 8th grade on September 11th, 2001, when my assistant principal called me into his office in the morning and said, you know, look at the towers. And we were on a hill in Brooklyn, and we could see the towers and the smoke coming out of the buildings, the sky filled with glass. And I'll never forget that day, right? Being in an emergency in New York City, having my students wonder if their parents were okay. Coming back in the days and weeks after, and planes flying overhead, and my students ducking under their desks, whenever a plane was by. And I'll never forget how the New York community came together. You would go to some of the parks in New York, and there would be, unfortunately, all these missing signs up everywhere. But there were constant vigils. There were constant meetings of people coming together. Try to brainstorm, how can we lift each other up? How can we show that America will be a leader for everyone in the world, that we will present an image of peace and justice and love. And I'll also never forget, unfortunately, how that moment of crisis was abused by some of the folks in power. And how the Attorney General at that time, John Ashcroft, started rounding people up. And you probably experienced it here in New York and New Jersey. People started disappearing into something I wasn't even aware of at the time, that there was an alternate detention network for immigrants, right? And that folks of South Asian and Middle Eastern birth were being sent to these detention centers, and their families couldn't communicate with them. They were basically held incommunicado. And it was in 2002 when I took the test to become a lawyer, the LSAT. And I sat on it for about 4 years, but the idea that someone needed to push back against this hateful rhetoric and these hateful policies is what kind of got me on the track. And so eventually, in 2006, my wife went to veterinary school, and I followed her. It's probably the smartest decision I ever made. I went to law school and came back as a civil rights lawyer. Took on cases like, workplace discrimination, representing women who suffered harassment, or whistleblowers who were facing retaliation. But then ended up in the city of Austin at this very interesting moment in history when the state government tries to make an example of our local government in order to prove a political point. And we have a sheriff in 2017 who's elected saying something not very controversial to me, which is maybe we shouldn't deport every single person that winds up in jail. Maybe if you're arrested on a minor offense, it could be a traffic violation, your family shouldn't be shackled, right? That you should be able to stay with your family. And then we see these laws that start to happen. They introduced Senate Bill 4, and that's when I first actually started following Pastor Rigby. He's arrested, protesting that law. And folks like you petitioned our city council to get involved in the issue. And so one day, after the mayor and city council took a vote, the city attorney came into the law department and said, "Would anyone here like to sue the governor?" I said, "I would." So I had the opportunity to be the lead lawyer for Austin in that lawsuit where we challenged Senate Bill 4. And it was really an uplifting experience. This was before that young man from El Paso ran for Senate and convinced everyone that Texas could turn blue. But it wasn't just Austin that stood up against Senate Bill 4. It was El Paso. It was San Antonio. It was Houston. It was Dallas. It was all these counties, these border towns. And that really let me know that this state has a progressive heart. It may be more in the cities or on the border, but there are many of us. And we're not only willing to fight for ourselves, but we're willing to fight for people we don't know in the name of human dignity and human rights. And so to me, that gave me a lot of courage, that so many of us were willing to fight for human rights and dignity. And, that struggle was very important for a lot of people. We won a major legal battle to stop that law, although the Conservative Court of Appeals later let it take effect. But it gave me a lot of inspiration. That's one reason why I became a candidate. I'm not going to talk about the campaign, but the idea that there's so many of us out there, and that even if a district was gerrymandered and supposed to be permanent Republican, that maybe it could be Democrat if we show up and do the work. So, over time, I've gotten to learn about how many people in the Texas 10th, which, if you haven't memorized the map, basically goes from the lake all the way up to Tomball, crosses 9 counties, and includes places where maybe you only drive past them on the way to Houston, Whether you're taking 71 or 290, it's basically that entire community. And what I've learned is that in these towns, these places like Brenham and Eagle Lake, Cypress, Tomball, Ellinger, LaGrange, there are caring and loving people in each of these places. And they might think they're alone, If I knock on their door and talk to them, they might tell me they'll support me. But when I say, "Would you put up a sign?" they say, "Oh no, my neighbors will shoot it up," right? But it turns out, if you look at the list, there's actually more of them than they realize. And so The struggle for justice for immigrants is one of the things that has really inspired me about our Austin community. And that's one of the things that made me run for Congress. The question of immigration is a question of who can be in this country, who gets to call themselves American. A similar issue is who gets to decide who's in power in America. And that's where this issue of voting rights has really come up. And I really think they're two sides of the same coin. It's who can be here and who can control the country. And if justice for immigrant families is what got me into running for Congress, it's the struggle for voting rights that has proven to be where I've felt most useful as a candidate and as somebody who's active in this district. And we saw an intersection of these two issues in early 2019 when the Secretary of State announced that he was going to purge 95,000 people from the voting rolls. This was this interim Secretary of State named David Whitley, appointed by Greg Abbott. Used to be Greg Abbott's driver, I understand. But he basically relied on the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, to come up with a list of 95,000 people who he said had voted illegally. And it turns out most of these people are newly naturalized Mexican-American citizens, just by coincidence, right? And it turns out that the way they identified these people was by looking at driver's license information going back 15, 20 years. And in this country, if you have a green card, for example, you can still get a driver's license. And so Ken Paxton and these other folks said, hey, they weren't a citizen when they got a driver's license. They voted in 2018. Look at the illegal people voting. And of course, every year in Texas, we naturalized 50,000 new citizens. And so if you had a green card 15 years ago, there's plenty of opportunity to become a citizen by 2018. But this was a huge thing because not only did they share that they were going to purge these so-called illegal voters, but then President Trump shared that, hey, look at these 100,000 people in Texas who are voting and they shouldn't be. And this ended up, it was really just an attack on the immigrant community and on people of color and Mexican Americans who have every right to vote because they're citizens, but are in a vulnerable position. And I learned how this was experienced firsthand because after this announcement was made, some of the counties in Texas immediately said they would clean up the rolls. And so they sent out these letters. And several hundred of these letters went out in Austin County, which if you haven't been there, it's where Siegel is. It's just southwest of Houston. And it's a community that's overall pretty hostile to immigrants and to Mexican American people. What I've heard is that you can be a fifth-generation Texan in that community, but if you have skin that's even a little bit brown, you're likely to be pulled over and asked about your status. And for folks who just got their legal status as citizens, the idea that they get this letter in the mail from the county clerk that has in bold print, you're suspected of illegally voting, a crime punishable by imprisonment. And if you don't show up within 15 days to prove that you're a lawful U.S. citizen, we will commence legal action against you. These are the letters that went out to people who are U.S. citizens. And this is already a county that's not friendly to these folks. And so it shows how the immigrant rights issue and the voting rights issue, they intersect. And these levers that the other side is pushing to kind of divide us and to suppress our vote are common on both these struggles with immigration and voting rights. And it's not just the impact that these letters have on the person who's receiving it. Because if you're a U.S. citizen, it might be a little bit of trouble, but you can show up and show your passport or your citizenship information. But where this becomes particularly insidious is when these letters go out to families that are mixed status families. Because as we know in Texas, there are many families that have some people who are citizens and some people who aren't. And when you get this letter, even as a U.S. citizen, if you have a family member in the household who doesn't have complete status, it's a threat. Because here's your address on an official document. And the government is basically saying, we're going to come check you out if you try to vote. And so even if you have every right to vote, you might be discouraged from doing so because you think it's going to expose other people in your family. And these attacks are they're hateful, they're divisive, I believe they're racist in nature, and they are undermining our democracy, right? Because the right to vote in a democratic nation like ours is the most fundamental and important right. It's the right that all these other rights come from. And so when you're talking about these attacks on voting rights, when you're talking about laws like Senate Bill 4, which caused terror in our community, you might remember in February of 2017, they started some raids, and it wasn't coincidental. It turned out that the state and the federal government were coordinating, basically to punish us for having Sally Hernandez as our sheriff. And so these issues go together. And kind of like what Steve was saying, I'm not trying to bring you down, right? But these are some of the issues we're confronting in terms of standing up for humanity. Now, in the case of the purge of 95,000 voters, people did show up. I know some of the people in this room showed up. We went to the state capitol, we testified, and David Whitley lost his job. He wasn't confirmed as the Secretary of State. In the fight against Senate Bill 4, we won some very important legal victories, and we also inspired a new generation of Latino activists, social justice activists to get involved in Texas politics. And we have to keep on fighting. One last story I'll share is from a different community, but it's on the same issue of who should have a voice. And so when I was running for Congress last cycle, I learned that students at an historically black college in the Texas 10th were also going to be denied the right to vote. And so you may know about Prairie View A&M University. It's in Waller County, Texas, which is basically the last county before Harris County on your drive out there. And this is an historically black college that was built on the plantation of a former slave plantation. And it was founded, they were promised that they would be on par with Texas A&M. Of course, that hasn't happened. And the students there have had to fight every step of the way for dignity and respect. Even to the point that when they lowered the voting age from 21 years of age to 18 in this country, the 26th Amendment in the 1960s, those students started to vote in Waller County, but the Waller County officials didn't like it. And they told those students, you're not residents of this county, you can't vote here. And in the 1960s, culminating in 1971 at the US Supreme Court, those students took their fight to the courts and actually won a battle, a case called Sim v. United States, that won the right for every college student in this country to vote where you attend school. So if any of you have ever voted where you attend school, or have kids or grandkids who have done the same, it's thanks to those kids in Prairie View over there in Waller County. But unfortunately, that didn't stop those officials in Waller County. And so every 10 years they would come up with a new tactic. And in 2018, what they did is they told the students 2 days before the voter registration deadline, you're not eligible to vote because you registered to vote the wrong way. And so it gets a little nuanced in what happened. But basically, the students don't have on-campus mail delivery at Prairie View. And that's also a problem. There's some reasons behind that. But because they didn't have on-campus mail delivery, they don't have a postal box to call their own. So they were told by the prior elections clerk, okay, register at this generic address. Then a new elections clerk came in and said, that address is in the wrong precinct. You know, this is from the same party, both Republicans. You can't vote on campus on election day. And so this was obviously a huge concern, and I did something that's pretty basic for a lawyer. I wrote a letter. And I had some local Democrats, other candidates sign it. And I had my organizer for that area, an awesome kid named Jacob Aronowitz. I had him hand deliver the letter to the county judge. And he hands it to the county clerk who's there to receive it, and he takes a picture of himself handing it over to prove that he delivered the letter. And the clerk objects. She said, what are you doing? She calls the bailiff over to stop Jacob, and he's prevented from leaving the building. And so at that point he calls me on the phone, not as his boss, but as his civil rights lawyer, and says, what should I do? I say, well, and he has me on the speakerphone. I say, ask them if you're free to leave. And they say no. And then he's basically surrounded by 6 or 7 law enforcement officers, sheriff's deputies. Ultimately, the Waller County Sheriff shows up, a figure just out of Dukes of Hazzard, if you have that image in your mind. But they say, what's this about? I say, well, I'm just delivering a letter. What's the letter say? It's about the right to vote of students at Prairie View. Why are you doing this? Well, I work for a congressional candidate. He's concerned. What party is the candidate from? And I hear this, and he says Democrat. And I hear a chuckle, and then the phone goes dead. And it turns out that the county sheriff had ordered him arrested and held for 48 hours investigative detention. And we had a local attorney show up. He only spent 4 hours in jail. And, he was a good sport about it. It was building his credibility among his fellow political organizers. He was charged with failing to identify himself, which is not a real charge. If you're not suspected of a crime, or if you're not a witness, you don't have to identify yourself. But it turned out good things came from this. The next day we held a little rally at Prairie View, and Congressman Al Green came. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee called in, and we got the local news, the Houston Chronicle. And then that night we got a call to say, could we appear on the Rachel Maddow show the next day? And so Jacob and I appeared on the Rachel Maddow show the next day. She did a 19-minute history telling the whole struggle for voting rights at Prairie View. And the day after that, I got a call from the former Texas Secretary of State, who said, how do we fix this? And he ordered the county to let the students vote on campus on election day. And then we got to go on Rachel Maddow again and tell the story of how we went. To me, that story is important for different reasons. One, it shows the value of being present in a community and, listening to folks' concerns. This wasn't necessarily a national issue at the time, but because we were responsive, we were able to make a difference, and we inserted ourselves into this struggle. But, bigger picture, it just shows how vigilant we need to be about the fight for voting rights, because, they want to stop young people from voting. They want to stop black kids from voting. They want to stop Mexican-American new citizens from voting. And this is all about determining who gets to control our government, and who our government really represents when it comes down to it. And so, to me, these struggles have given, real meaning to this work of being a political candidate. It's allowed me to do things that are not just about asking for someone's vote. Because it's hard to get up each day and do this work. And if I just felt like it was only dependent on election day, I don't think I'd do it. I don't think my wife would support me doing this. It wouldn't be worth the effort. But if we can do good things along the way, with our lives, with our work, it makes everything meaningful. And so, to me, the common thread with these stories is that we have an active movement in this country. There's actually multiple movements to determine, what the soul of America is. And there are some people who want to say that if you weren't born here, if you speak Spanish, if you have indigenous ancestry, that you shouldn't become a citizen. That if you're from an African country, if you're from a Muslim nation, that you shouldn't be allowed to travel here. That if you live in a black community, if you're a recently naturalized citizen, that you shouldn't be able to vote. You shouldn't be able to decide who sets our priorities. But of course, this completely contradicts what my image of this country should be, what the American dream should be. And I think I speak for us here that it contradicts the type of Texas that we want to manifest, the type of country we want to be. To me, it also shows the power of resistance and the power of standing up even when it's not completely popular or there may not be many of us, right? Because you probably didn't know that as a church, when you provided sanctuary to Ilda and Yvonne, when your pastor joined this fight against Senate Bill 4, that it would inspire someone like me to run for Congress. You don't realize that you might have planted that seed that led to me being here in front of you, talking to you about how you planted that seed, right? And you didn't know how the resistance to Senate Bill 4 paved the way for this young congressman from El Paso to run for Senate, to go to every of the 254 counties, how many times, and to inspire the country, that Texas isn't this, red monolith that people outside of Texas might think it is. And, Jacob, when he went to the Waller County Courthouse to deliver that letter, he didn't know that he would soon be arrested, but that his arrest would inspire folks. And truthfully, there are people in the black community in places like Brenham and Hempstead and Brookshire who remember me to this day because my campaign got involved with that. And, it means a lot for folks that some white guy from Austin was willing to do this work for their kids. And if we can set that kind of example, that we won't just fight for ourselves, that we will fight for our neighbors, we will fight for people we don't know, in our community and outside of our community, that will do tremendous things for this state, for this country, giving people hope. And so, when we stand up on behalf of others, we sacrifice not just for ourselves, but for the broader community. We plant these seeds of community, of resistance, and we never know how they will grow. So hopefully when I'm doing this work, I'm also planting seeds that I won't see come to fruition, but that will lead to a stronger and better community to come. Anyway, so I thank you all for having me. Mike Siegel, appreciate your time and this opportunity. Thanks so much.
Mike, you have some time for questions and answers?
Sure.
Thank you for being here, Mike. Before I came here today, we were at a climate forum, and they were talking about almost exactly the same thing you were talking about, only climate justice, and how its impact on people of color, people of low income, where they build these massive chemical plants that are poisoning their neighbors. And I'd like to get your thoughts on, in fact, Bridget Shea, County Commissioner, said that she's proposing a resolution to the county commissioners to begin suing some of the fossil fuel companies because they're spending millions now to raise roads, to raise low water crossings because all the maps are changing from the watershed because of climate change. And this county has to come up with all this money to take these people out of the floodplain or build up the roads and so on. So what are your thoughts about suing some of the people that are causing this distress?
Well, certainly, in terms of this theme of our common humanity, we all need a stable climate. We all need clean air and clean water. And to me, these are universal issues. In Texas, they've been hard political issues because of how much money is rooted in the fossil fuel industry. And I've made that a big part of the work I do. The district I'm in basically connects our environmentalist community here in Austin with the folks out in Fayette County who are living with this coal plant that the city of Austin is a part owner of, and which has unfortunately really destroyed some of that community. The acid rain that comes down because of the emissions from the plant has ruined livestock, agriculture. I know a pecan farmer whose family has a pecan farm that's been there for over 100 years. Used to be the most productive orchard in Texas, but now produces 0 pecans because of the impact of that plant. And it also connects to the Houston area, which has experienced 5 500-year flood events in 5 years. And this is one of these stats that seems like it makes no sense, right? But a 500-year flood event is an event that, according to existing models, should happen once every 500 years. But they've had 5 of them in 5 years. And so climate change is upon us. The destruction of our environment is upon us. And what I really love about the young people in particular, these high school students who are organizing the climate strikes, the young woman from Scandinavia, Greta Thunberg. I was with a Latino youth group called Jolt Action that had an event in Pasadena, Texas. And if you've ever driven to Pasadena, you can't forget it. Because you are driving through what's probably the global epicenter of fossil fuel refineries over by the port. I mean, a wasteland is not the right word, but it does feel a little post-apocalyptic. All the smokestacks and refineries and the smell. And in Deer Park, right next to Pasadena, they had this terrible chemical fire earlier this year from the ITC facility. And too many of these facilities are located in what we call frontline communities. These are communities that don't have effective political representation or voice in the process. So they've been forced to live next to very dangerous facilities. And so I feel like the fight for climate justice is not only a fight for our planet, but it's also a fight for democracy, to make sure everyone has a real chance. I mean, how can you have equal opportunity if some people have clean water and some people don't, right? If some kids are growing up with asthma and some aren't. And so I've made that a big part of the work I'm doing in terms of supporting a Green New Deal. And just to explain that a little bit, because most people have heard those 3 words but don't really know what it means. Under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we had a New Deal, right? And the idea, it was a response to the Great Depression. We have millions of people out of work. At that time, many of them were living on the lawn in Washington, D.C., in these so-called Hoovervilles, right? And the New Deal was a way to put millions of people to work, building a new infrastructure for America, a new energy grid, all sorts of water facilities, flood control facilities, even culture. I mean, put millions of people to work. And not only got us out of the Depression, but put America in the position so that we could defeat fascism in World War II. If we hadn't had the New Deal, we wouldn't have been strong enough to defeat fascism abroad. And so the idea is right now we have another couple crises. We have climate change and economic inequality, right? We have over half the people in this country who basically are at the poverty level or just above and can't really survive an unexpected expense of $400 or more. I mean, that's how vulnerable half of our country is. And so that we need a similar mobilization to confront climate change and rebuild our economy using the power of the federal government. And so whether Travis County should sue the operators or whether we should replace our state or federal government, I think there are a lot of tools in the toolbox. And I'll let Commissioner Shea work on that one. But I do think it needs to be all hands on deck in terms of protecting our planet.
I would be so proud to have you represent me in Congress. Particularly somebody with dark hair rather than white hair. But I wonder, as a freshman congressman, what do you think can be done to heal the political division of this?
So the question is, healing the political divide. And what can a first-term congressperson do? I think the piece I could take ownership of is being open and accessible and available to the people in this district and hearing people out. The current representative doesn't do that, doesn't show up for town halls, and that just promotes further division. I mean, I'll take this climate change issue as an example. It's not a universally popular issue to talk about. In a district that has oil and gas workers on the Houston side, people who work at BP and Exxon and Schlumberger, whose livelihoods depend on the fossil fuel industries. Even though I'm a strong union guy, my mom was a union organizer, I grew up in a union family, I'm a two-time union member myself, I had some problems getting the support from the Houston unions because half of them work in these fossil fuel-related industries. The steel workers operate the refineries, the seafarers operate the ships in the channel, the plumbers and pipe fitters build the pipelines. And even though they like my union background, they don't like that I'm saying those three words, Green New Deal. But I'll tell you, I actually earned the support from those same fossil fuel workers after spending 3 days with them at the Texas AFL-CIO convention and hearing them out. And by the end of that convention, they didn't say, I love the Green New Deal. But what they said was, I trust that when you're in there, you're going to bring us to the table with you. And our voices are going to be heard as part of that process. And I think that's the most we can do as representatives, is hear people out and commit to fighting for them on the issues they care about. In the small towns in the Texas 10th and places like Brenham, the struggle for clean water is something that applies to everybody. I mean, these people drink out of their own wells. And unfortunately, because of the fracking that's happening across the district, when they pull water out, they're getting a lot of chemicals that they'd rather not be drinking. And the current representation hasn't helped them with that. And so I think on some of those small local issues, I can win people over one by one. I'm not going to fix the overall divide. I'm not going to convince every Trump voter to support me. Some of those folks will just look at a picture of my family and say they don't like me, But I do think we can bridge a lot of the divide in this country by kind of having just a more pragmatic approach and listening to people.
With the Medicare for All or Green New Deal, how is that going to, in your vision, how that's going to affect Medicare and people that are on Medicare now, how will it influence them?
So this is a big healthcare question that's come up in my campaign. When I started running for Congress this time, Medicare for All was polling at 75% or more popularity across the country, even among Republicans. But the whole presidential debate has really, I guess, to some extent, muddled the waters. And I'm not sure a lot of people really understand what we mean when we say that. And so when I say Medicare for All, what I mean is that we take our existing system, Medicare signed into law by Lyndon B. Johnson, former Democratic representative in the Texas 10th, a program that, when it was proposed originally, was designed to be extended to every American over time. When it was proposed under Truman, was the first person to propose it, the idea was that you just add basically another 10 years of people to it each time. So it starts out 65 and up, then you add the people 55 and up, and over time you make it available to everybody. And I think the idea is that you have to improve Medicare, you have to expand it, you have to add, vision, dental, long-term supports and services for severely disabled people. You have to make it a truly comprehensive, powerful program. but then you extend it to everybody. And the reason you do that is because that's the only way you basically provide insurance for the 29 million or so Americans who have no coverage at all. That's the only way you protect tens of millions of more who are at risk of bankruptcy in the event of a serious medical crisis. And what it would mean is that when you go to the hospital or the doctor, it's free at the point of service, no copays, no deductibles, no premiums, that every doctor is in plan, every hospital is in plan, every specialist is in plan, so you have more choice. And by having a universal program, you keep the cost down. Medicare has, I think, a 3% administrative cost, whereas these private companies, it's 20% or more. So enormous savings. You get the prescription drug prices down. You take what's currently going towards corporate profits and CEO bonuses and put that back towards patient care. And that you could basically cover tens of millions more people with a better program for about the same amount of money that we're spending now. Now, obviously, that's hostile to an entire industry, a huge part of our economy that is profiting off of our care, and so it's not an easy political fight. But to me, what I want to talk about is where we're going to. Now, it could be that I go into Congress and the votes are only there for a public option, so that's what we get. But by fighting up here for everybody, we maybe make space for that compromise in the middle, which is a public option. But if we start out saying we're only going to improve Medicare a little bit, we have no leverage. When we get to Congress, we're not going to make any progress. And to me, Democrats should stand for universal values. Everyone gets good public schools. Everyone gets health care. Everyone gets housing. Everyone has a living wage. And that's how we bring everyone along with us.
What do you say to people, and I'm one of them, who are so terrified that by wanting this big thing, you're going to scare the people, the other? Because when people are really, when people like the sound of Medicare for all, but when they then ask them, it's going to mean your insurance that you liked and you fought for is going to be taken away, we're going to have something that we're not sure of. What do you say to them? Like the culinary workers in Nevada who are now rebelling against that. What would you say to them? Not so they don't get scared and we lose it all.
Right, and somehow we have to break through the talking points, right? For someone with private insurance, what do you like about it? And this expanded, improved Medicare could cover the same things. And if you are a member of a union that bargained for a good healthcare plan, wouldn't it be better that you don't have to bargain for healthcare anymore and then more money is available for wages? Because that's really what the take-home would be for the unions, is that their employer would no longer have to provide it, and therefore they could bargain only for wages. And so they could have a great healthcare program and better pay. And so that's the argument we need to make. And so I don't think it's, the culinary union, the leaders have put the statement out there. That doesn't mean the members have. And so we kind of have to work through these things step by step. We need a more reasoned conversation about it. And the big thing that I keep coming back to is we need to build trust. For 40 years or more in this country, the right wing, ever since Barry Goldwater, has been trying to prove that government is the problem and the free market is the solution. And so we used to have much more trust in public health care, public housing, public services. Now that, for a lot of folks, the government's the enemy. And so when I'm talking about a Green New Deal or Medicare for All, one of the things I'm bumping into is a lack of trust in the government, or fear that the government's going to break it. And so I think for some of these programs, we're going to have to push for bite-sized pieces. The New Deal wasn't just one program. It was 15 years of legislation. The Green New Deal needs to be similar. There's a bill right now that's just about electric vehicle charging locations across the country. There's a Green New Deal for housing. How do we weatherize our homes to save energy? We're going to have to, upgrade our electric grid. There's so many little pieces. And as we implement these things, and each piece creates jobs and improves people's quality of life, then we're going to build more trust. I agree, we can't snap our fingers and get back to where we were in the third term of FDR, where there was that kind of belief that government could do something. But at the same time, I don't want to compromise for the wrong reason, And so I would like to work through all of these questions. And I think that for union members, universal federal health care program, that means that when you leave your job, you're still covered. I think that's a better deal for workers, but we need to have that discussion.
Right. I have a question. So you notice that the unemployment is really low. You also notice how high the debt is. What are we going to do about that?
So,
The easy question.
two different questions, right?
30 seconds or less.
So for unemployment, what I like to say, and this, sometimes people are like, huh? Not all good jobs are good jobs. Not all jobs are good jobs. And so what I mean when I say that is we have too many people who are working, and what's the minimum wage in Texas? $7.25 an hour. Hasn't gone up in over 10 years. Meanwhile, folks like Jeff Bezos from Amazon have seen their wealth double in about that time. And so the idea that we have a minimum wage where people have to work 2 and 3 jobs to support themselves is obscene. And so we need to make sure that one job is enough, right? That you should be able to support your family if you work one full-time job. And so to me, this question about the employment rate is misleading because wages are so low that people can't support their families, barely have time to breathe, much less help their kids at school or tend to their garden or take care of their own mental health. And so we need to restructure the economy so that people can survive and have some dignity. The question of the debt, this gets pretty wonky pretty fast. And I have to start with this idea that the government's budget is not like our household budget, right? If you or I don't have enough money to pay the bills, we're in trouble, right? They turn the lights off, they turn the internet off, they'll come take your car. But the government that has its own currency, that prints its own currency, it's not the same question. And so we can operate with a $20 trillion deficit, although that sounds really crazy. The concern is inflation, or these other economic metrics. Can the economy handle it? And so, in addition to my not all jobs are good jobs, I would say not all debt is bad debt. And so what I mean by that is that if we spend $1 trillion making sure everyone has health care, which then improves people's productivity, helps people avoid bankruptcy, encourages young people to start their own businesses, or to change to a job they love more, that's a good investment. That's going to improve the economy. That's going to improve the quality of life. But if we give $1 trillion to the wealthiest people in America in the form of a tax cut and to big corporations, that then give that money back to their shareholders, they don't create new jobs, they just increase their own share value. That's bad debt. That's a bad use of our public funds because it's not benefiting the great majority of the people. And so big picture, we just need to reorient our government towards working people, which it's clearly failed in that way because of the corruption of our political system.
Thank you.